Welcome to the MDM podcast. I'm Mike Hockett, our executive editor. Starting in late 2023, we've been rolling out a series of MDM case studies, which are deep, three-part dives into distributors that have undergone significant change in recent years, whether in terms of their sales model, technology adoption, or other innovation levers they've recently pulled. We now have 4 of them published, covering Fastenal, Watsco International, Ferguson, and Watsco. Premium members have complimentary access to them from their premium dashboard, while non-members can purchase them in the MDM store. So far, each of these case studies has been authored by John Gunderson, a veteran sales, category management, analytics, pricing, and market leader for a handful of distributors that include EIS, Annixter, Whitecap, and Crescent Electric. He's also an experienced industry consultant and writer, and MDM's former VP of Analytics. John has a wealth of industry knowledge on supply channel topics and a great mix of perspectives on it, making him a perfect candidate to write these case studies. In this episode, John and I discussed the 2 most recently published case studies, which explored Ferguson and Watsco, the latter of which went live in early January. This episode is brought to you by MDM's free virtual AI for Distributors Summit, which will be on March 12th. This event will provide real-world use cases, how-to testimonials, and thought-provoking analysis from distribution executives, solution providers, team leaders, and other executives about how to select the right AI tools for you or how to scale what you're already doing with the technology. You can find event details and registration on mdm.com and in our other promotions for it. With that, enjoy this episode. John, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Mike.
Over the past couple of years, you've really leaned into the content side of things, lending your voice, whether it's in written, audio, on video, or in person, whether it's collaborating with David Gordon over at Electrical Trends, the guys over at Advantage, your work with the Doran Group, and of course, as a contributor to MDM. And it's something I'd like to see more of the industry partake in. There's just so many wonderful technical knowledge sources stored in the head of a lot of longtime executives in this channel that would do very well for our audience of distributors and manufacturers to be educated on. And we at MDM are always looking for great sources of industry knowledge, and you are certainly one of them. So big thanks to you, John, for everything you've shared with the MDM audience.
Thank you, Mike.
Well, you have 4 of these MDM case studies now in the books. You started in the fall of 2023 with Fastenal, then we had Watsco, Ferguson, and then Watsco in 2024. And we just rolled out part 1 of MSC Industrial Supply on the MDM website on Premium. Each of these are very well-known distributors that are major market movers and are near or at the, or they're either at or near the top of a lot of our MDM's top distributor list. So as a former distribution executive, what's this been like for you to really dive into each of these companies, research them, and then articulate how each of them has transformed in recent years?
Yeah, Mike, for me, it was really interesting because although I worked for one of the profile companies that I came into that profile company, I did not join them because they bought Annixter after I exited that side of the business. But looking at each of the 4, they're all 4 distinct channels. And I thought it's really interesting. And you and I have talked about a lot. Each one has a different approach of how they get there, and each one is really successful.
So we're here to debrief from your MDM case studies on Ferguson and then Watsco. Both have been published, with Watsco is publishing just a couple weeks ago here in early January. And if you're a premium member, you already have free access to these case studies, as well as the 3-part article series that preface them. It's there ready to download from your premium dashboard. And if you're not a premium member, you are still able to purchase these from the MDM store. So John, let's dive in, starting with Ferguson, which is represented on 7 of MDM's 19 top distributors list, second only behind Grainger. They're number 1 in plumbing, number 2 in HVAC, refrigeration, and industrial PVF. And they also place highly on industrial supplies, MRO, building materials, and Jansan. And it just speaks to the scale that Ferguson has in many of these different verticals. I know there's a lot of people, including myself, that you think of Ferguson primarily as a plumbing, PVF, and HVAC distributor, but they have that much revenue in a lot of these different verticals that it's hard to paint them as just a plumbing distributor or just an HVAC distributor. They have real strength in a lot of these channels.
Yeah, Mike, I agree. What's interesting about Ferguson, and as we were doing this series, was they're really after kind of 9 distinct customer groups, and we really dive into that in depth. And a big focus of theirs, what I would say their biggest focus, is that dual trade contractor in plumbing and HVAC. So many contractors are now both or migrating to both. So as the end customer, sort of a plumbing end contractor goes into HVAC or they combine operations, Ferguson's really trying to be that one-stop shop there.
And they seem to be ahead of the curve that way. Like you see Home Depot trying to explore these cross-sell opportunities with building materials. You see the QXO, the new building materials distributor, they're trying to look for those cross-selling where if you're installing, I don't know, if you're building a new apartment building, you're going to need, infrastructure, you're going to need plumbing, you're going to need electrical. And these companies want to be that one-stop shop. So I think Ferguson has really leaned into getting ahead on that.
Yeah, I think what they've done there, and what I like to call it channel drift. They've gotten in, they were primarily plumbing and PVF, and now they're into serving 9 distinct segments. And I think a lot of what they're doing is try to make sure they bundle all the services they can in a one-stop shop. And they're still branch-based. They have, within 60 miles of their customers, or 95% of them within 60 miles of their locations. So they're close. They've got material. And Mike, the other thing to understand is in terms of service, in terms of how often you service something, HVAC on average is an HVAC system gets serviced every 2 to 3 years, high heat, high cold. Yeah. The next one behind that is plumbing. So they're really in 2 service-focused industries and have done a really good job of building out their tools to attack that.
So I know this case study focuses on Ferguson's recent history, but looking a little further back, they started in Newport News, Virginia, which is also their current headquarters. Started in the U.S. in 1953. They got up to over $80 million in revenue by the time it was acquired by UK-based Wolseley in 1982. But Ferguson just continued to grow here in the U.S. and North America, and the U.S. eventually represented the majority of Wolseley's sales. And to reflect this, it started this almost decade-long separation from the Wolseley branding in 2017 when Wolseley PLC changed its name to Ferguson PLC. And then I think it was 2021, Ferguson completed the sale of the last of its operating business in Europe, so that it could fully focus on North America, where 95% of its customer base was, and it began trading on the New York Stock Exchange that year. And then just last year, as almost kind of a symbolic gesture, Ferguson reestablished a new corporate structure that allowed the I think they called it the redomiciliation, if that's the right word for it. Basically, just headquartering their company as Ferguson Enterprises here in the U.S., which, it served as the completion of Ferguson's separation from Wolseley. Although the Wolseley name does still exist under Ferguson's Canada subsidiary, which is Wolseley Industrial Group. So just a bit of history there, how Ferguson got at least its branding from where it was to where it is today. Very strong in North America, as we said, under primarily 9 different industrial channels, where it's not just they have a presence in each of these, they have a major presence in a lot of these.
No doubt.
So I love that term that you had of channel drifting, and it really represented how Ferguson, maybe their core started out as, plumbing, PVF, and HVAC, but they've really gone hard into these adjacent categories like building materials, like just some of these more infrastructure, waterworks things that really complement what they've been doing very well for so long.
Yeah, Mike, they've even acquired lighting design centers and specialty hardware and things that you just really wouldn't think fit to that core plumbing and PVF heritage. And it's really, they've been one of the most active acquirers over the last 5-6 years. There's been years where they've acquired more than 10 nameplates.
Yeah, I don't have the number right in front of me, but I think the number they keep mentioning is over the past 5 years, it's around 50 acquisitions that they just kind of keep churning out. Trailing last 5 years, it's 50 acquisitions, and they have a habit of they don't just announce one acquisition at once. When they make an announcement, they're like, "We acquired these 3 distributors, in the last quarter, representing, sometimes it's multi-$100 million of added revenue." So I know that they're doing great organic things, but they are definitely being aggressive on the acquisition front.
Yeah. Mike, I think we really dive deep into what we call channel drift. Started as plumbing, PVF, and now they're in 9 different segments thereafter. We dive deep in that in the series. I hope you would go out and read it and download the report. And then we also really dive deep into their private brand. They're one of the leaders in private brand. They've actually acquired some companies that are just as brands. They have, really some strong exclusive brands, which is close to double digits of their total revenue. Yeah. And I would encourage you to really dive into that. And then the last part we really covered heavy was digital, right? Just not only do they have Ferguson.com, they own Build.com, which is it's owned by Ferguson, but it's really its own domain, has its own customer set. And then, Mike, you and I spent a lot of time talking about, they have probably one of the leading customer rewards program. Their Ferguson Pro Plus program is really ingrained with their contractors' customers. So they come in, they buy stuff, they get stuff, right? And they have a really strong program.
Yeah, that rewards program has been around for a while. And, all of us, no matter if we're buying from Subway, if we're buying from Starbucks, we're all using rewards programs. But most of these rewards programs really kind of got really going, almost accelerated by COVID, whereas Ferguson Rewards had the infrastructure of their current program around for, I think it's about a decade or longer now. But yeah, they've just, I think, leaned into that customer satisfaction, that stickiness factor that a rewards program has. It's been in place for quite a while.
Yeah, Mike, I think, sometimes when you're first, you're very hard to displace. I mean, it was a good decade ago. They had Terry Bradshaw doing commercials for him, right? Yeah. And they ended up getting their app on the phone of a lot of end customers, checking their, and once you're there, you're pretty hard to displace.
Yeah. I think them and Grainger, just they have that in common, where they went really heavy on not only e-commerce, but the app side of things, particularly just getting used to, having it, literally putting the company in customers' pockets whenever they need them to.
Yep.
So yeah, just a lot of just in-depth information about Ferguson and really looking at this 10-year journey, but even more specifically, what they've done in the last 5 years, especially that digital story is just really fascinating. So like we said, that's on the article series is on premium. And then the case study is there it's in the MDM store, and it's available complimentary for premium members. So go check that out. I think we published it in the fall of 2024. And then, as I said, just a couple of weeks ago, we published the completed case study of Watsco. So shifting gears over to Watsco, I guess it helps to start out with, who and what is Watsco? They are number one on MDM's top HVAC distributors. I think, what was it, $6 billion in revenue they had for 2023?
Yeah, it's a very significant number, Mike. Yeah.
And you labeled Watsco as I don't want to pronounce this wrong, but a disti manu. If you want to take us through what that means.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a term I picked up or that I just got in my mind over the years. I mean, Watsco is unique because they grew out of Carrier, the big HVAC manufacturer, to where they were really the distribution arm of Carrier. And then they set up as Watsco, and they have all these brands like Big Baker Distributing, where the Carrier, Carrier is selling tons of their equipment through Baker. Well, Watsco really became what I call the middleman between those two parties. So they're kind of a distributor and a manufacturer. Now they're distinct, but they have 60-some% of their total purchases that they make are through Carrier. So I think that's important. So kind of where does the line begin and end in the distributor is unique. So they're very driven on getting carrier equipment to the distributor and to the end contractor through the network. And I think that just makes them somewhat unique in distribution. The only other person like it is ADI sort of grew out of Honeywell, right? They were the distribution arm of Honeywell. So ADI is the only comparison where they may have a significant, huge percentage from one supplier.
Yep. And just some history there. It was Watsco's biggest acquisition it ever had back in 2012 when it bought 60% of Carrier's Canadian distribution business, which at the time, I think it had $330 million in revenue. And then a couple years later, it bought another 10% stake in Carrier, and then followed that another 10% at 16. So it just kept scaling that relationship that it had there. And as we've said here, it's a very, very tight relationship between those two. And basically, as Carrier goes, kind of as Watsco goes, I guess one thing I'm curious with that is just the risk potential there in terms of being, that reliant on that one core manufacturer. And like you said, there's not a ton of other examples like this in the channel, but any thoughts on the risk element there in terms of relying so much on one manufacturer, or is that just the nature of their business where it's been that from, the inception?
Yeah, Mike, I think it's somewhat of a blessing potentially and a curse, right? So a blurse. The blessing is Carrier's extremely got a high level of installed base. There's a lot of Carrier units outside of homes and commercial operations that when they go out, they usually replace it, or the part has to come from Carrier to make it in a repair situation. So their installed base is high, but it's also kind of puts you in a position where you can't support other equipment lines, a Man and Goodman, you name it, right? So it really means that you're successful together. So the risk is lower because their installed base is high, but they can't really get outside the Carrier box, right? Sure. Because, and so, the one parallel inside distribution, it's kind of like being a Rockwell automation distributor in electrical. Both sides occasionally will fight a little bit, but they both really need each other.
Exactly. One element that you touch on a couple times during this Watsco series is when we get into the digital and e-commerce story of Watsco, and you get into how Watsco talks about $2.4 billion of their 2023 sales, basically a third of the total business, was through e-commerce. And Watsco went on to say that that was a channel that just didn't exist for them a decade earlier. And there was a great quote that they put in there about, we are still in the early stages of what should be much broader adoption of e-commerce across the business. And you brought up the example of how it's kind of an Amazon day one kind of mindset where you're always in that startup mode of, we're just getting going on this. Anything further that you picked up on that in terms of that day one kind of mindset?
Yeah, I think Watsco, and we talk about that a lot. We got a whole series on how they got out early. They set up a group called Watsco Ventures, which is really sort of a what I would call an experiment box, right? One of those innovation centers where they're developing software. And they developed software that led into on-call air and some of the best apps for end customers. So they actually have businesses that they're selling software to end customers to use that go back through them. So they were way ahead. I thought one quote that we had in there that really jumped out that you and I were talking about was one of their distribution businesses said, "We are a technology company who happens to sell HVAC parts and supplies." I've never seen a distributor say that, right? That tells you how far Watsco is ahead in the digital journey.
Yeah, you're hearing more distributors almost want to be labeled just as much of a technology company as they are a distributor. But I think Watsco really got out in front of that. And like you said, I think it was their Gem Air brand that just had it as part of their branding. And that's just one brand of, what is it, at least a dozen for Watsco. But it seems like that's the mindset that the company has company-wide, not just with that one particular brand. So yeah, it definitely helps illustrate just where their mindset is and where their priorities are when it comes to, far past the identity of being just a product house. They are a tech solutions provider that is just trying to make their company's lives easier. And they're
Yeah.
doing that through a lot of different digital avenues.
Yeah, Mike, I think it's unique that they've even gone as far as with their credit for comfort offering to allow financing that their end customers can give to the homeowner. So, hey, the outside unit's going to cost you whatever it is, $7,000 to replace. We'll help you finance it. Their digital solutions are all based on what their end customers need, which I think is really unique. But they've gone, I'd say, over the third rail, so to speak, in distribution, where they actually have software solutions and companies that serve their end customers that are separate than Watsco.
And further into the case study, you got into a couple great stats that just help illustrate the stickiness that Watsco is seeing and how what they're doing on the digital front is creating more volume orders from e-commerce customers compared to their non-e-commerce customers. So it tells the story of why it makes sense for Watsco to convert as many customers as they can over to the digital side, just because they're getting even more traction and stickiness over there. So yeah, this is it's not a, they're not the only ones that are doing this, but it seems like, just like with Ferguson, it seems like Watsco really got ahead of the curve with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, Mike, one other area that we dove into that we just, probably the last thing we can talk about in preview is Watsco, I thought, used a really unique term because they have been very acquisitive. They bought distributors. They said that business was buy and build. So buy it, but then bring all the technology to each platform, the apps, the software, the end solutions to build it. So they've done a really good job of buying people who probably aren't as far along as they are, and then building them and integrating them into their technology packages. I thought that was fascinating. So, but the other thing that's fascinating is they keep the brands distinct.
Exactly.
So there's not a Watsco distributor out there that you can go, if you go search for it, you're like, well, what do you mean? It appears to be like a holding company. It's not a holding company. It's a company that's helping their brands grow.
Yeah, they almost have you almost look at them like a major hotel chain, like a Hilton or a Marriott, where sometimes you don't even know it's a Hilton or Marriott property until you really dig into it. I think with some of these Watsco brands, it might be the same thing, where each of these brands are doing their own thing, and Watsco is letting them do their own thing while also giving them the tools, the software, solutions to have that consistent experience across all these brands that everyone wants. So a lot of interesting stuff there. Yeah, so whether it's Watsco or Ferguson, definitely go check those out. These are just really great kind of 3-part stories that come together in the all-encompassing case study that adds on additional insights, additional statistics that you're really going to want to check out. And this alludes to our next point was, I already mentioned how our next case study is MSC Industrial Supply. So we're recording this on January 13th, and part 1 of MSC just went live on the MDM website on premium. So go check that out. It'll be in our newsletter, and parts 2 and 3 will be forthcoming. But without giving too much of this away, John, do you want to give us just kind of a teaser on what you are exploring there with the MSC story?
Yeah, I mean, we started with their biggest news, which was pricing, and they've been very public about it, how they've been trying to change their really complete pricing structure, and they've been open about it. And there have been some ups and downs there, but they're on the upward path now. That what I would call open up how we're doing pricing and changing, that hasn't been publicly announced by a distributor since Grainger, I think, in 2017 or so.
Right.
Redid theirs. So being a pricing guy, we really are diving deep into that because I find that fascinating. It's very rare that you kind of get a look behind the screen as to what someone's doing. We're going to write a lot about that, their digital effort, and how they're trying to go from as they call, a spot buy catalog house to a full service or a critical distributor. And they've done a good job on that journey. So I think MSC is really interesting because they're doing a lot of stuff, big transformative stuff right now on the fly. So I think it's going to be fascinating.
Yeah. I thought part 1 was a great, especially technical piece that gets into just why web pricing strategy is so hard to get right, and what MSC was probably what they've gone through and what they're going through right now. I think you give a really nice look into just the challenge involved with everything on that initiative. So yeah, for our audience, definitely stay tuned for the rest of MSC Part 2 and 3, and then its completed case study following that. And we're going to keep rolling out these case studies throughout 2025 because our audience keeps telling us those are the type of stories that they want to know, is how did a distributor go from A to point B and what happened in between? And I think these case studies do a great job of doing that. So with that, this is our first podcast of the year. John, we're still here in the first half of January. Just any general thoughts that you've had on the outlook for 2025? Anything you're picking up on discussions with manufacturers or distributors? How are people feeling out there?
Yeah, Mike, I think you at MDM with MDM Analytics and everything you do with Baird and the University of Colorado, I can't wait to see the next webinar, which should be the end of this month. You always do a outlook on growth rates by industry. But in general, I would say most people are saying it's not going to be a huge growth year, but people are way more positive about it than they were at this time last year. Both sides.
Yeah. Exactly. And from what we're seeing, I think the latest MDM forecast data came in. I think our forecast for the entire industry as a whole is just shy of 6% for annual growth, which historically would be a good year. It's not a gangbusters year, but it's definitely better than 2024 was. And if you go sector by sector, there's certainly going to be some industries that are going to fare much better than others. But as an aggregate, we're expecting it to be what I think most would consider a strong year. So a lot of optimism out there. There's obviously a lot of people talking about tariffs, a lot of people talking about interest rates, but even with all that considered, I think we're expecting a good year here in 25. So stay tuned for our MDM forecast on everything that goes, and stay tuned to all of our MDM quarterly reports that's going to really dive into all that economic data that's going to tell you what we're seeing and hearing and what the industry is telling us in terms of their outlooks. So with all that said, John, any final words before we sign off here?
No, Mike, thank you, and keep up the great work. And it's great working with you on the series. And we'll have more that you can listen to and follow on MDM.
Thank you. All right. This is the MDM Podcast signing off. Thanks for listening to the MDM Podcast, which was brought to you by our AI for Distributors Virtual Summit coming on March 12th. Like what you just heard, you can find all of our past podcast episodes at mdm.com/podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts.